Hello everyone, Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I am going to be dissertating and talking about the natal chart of Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony was born on March 19th, 1986 at 3:10 p.m. in Warren, Ohio, according to astrotheme.com. As many of you know, she was involved in a high-profile, prolific murder case where she was accused of murdering her child Kaylee Anthony, and in 2011 in July she was acquitted and apparently exonerated, and not just legally but in maybe some people's eyes. I think most people feel that she did get away with this iniquitous act. But anyway, I want to start just talking and dissertating about her chart. The first thing I want to talk about is her sun sign is Pisces. This is where I think she may have exhibited some negative characteristics of the sign, including prevarication, deception, and Casey appears and will appear to be very deceptive, and could well be a pathological liar. Mercury in Pisces reinforces this, and a lot of times people with Mercury in Pisces, especially if they're exhibiting the negative tendencies and traits, you don't always know what they're saying is fact or fallacy. And this factored into her personality a lot, and what we saw of her on during the trial. Her moon is in Cancer, and Cancers can be known to be enamored and infatuated with home and family. So, maybe at some point in her life she actually really, was, very family-oriented, compassionate, sympathetic, or what have you. They could also be, moon in Cancer, in the negative sense, could be mercurial and fickle, and, maybe being able to manipulate things on in some way, shape, or form. And she did seem like she could have, may very well have been manipulated and manipulative in this trial situation, and perhaps she did so to the jury on some level. Her rising sign is Leo, and Leo rising sign people can often be flamboyant, attention-getting, they're very charismatic, resolute. They also can have a propensity to win and no-win arenas, and it seems like by emerging victorious in this trial is that she very well could have done that. She went against insurmountable odds, and when this trial originally started, I was thinking, oh, there's no way she's going to be found innocent, because the evidence just seems so overwhelming against her. But that shows her intractable side, I guess, immutable side, where she wasn't going to give in, and she's going to stick to her story, one way or the other in the as far as the situation with her murder accusation on her goes. Another thing I noticed in her horoscope I thought was interesting. She has something called a grand water trine, where she has 3 planets. They're all in water sign, and they're all 100, not exactly in this case 120 degrees from each other, but they do form the trine. Each planet with their orb of that they have for each planet. So anyway, the grand water trine can be perceptive, insightful, intuitive. In some cases, maybe some people might have ability to be mediumistic. I think what I noticed about her grand water trine is the 3 planets involved: the moon, in Jupiter, and Pluto. The moon is about emotional needs, and I think sometimes it could be their own, it has to do with your own egocentric needs, and and emotional. Jupiter is a planet where it's it has to do with freedom, and then you have the Pluto, which is destructive. And I think all these planets intertwine, and I think they played a role in maybe this situation with her daughter, because if she we don't know 100% if she did commit this heinous crime, then the moon, you know, satisfying, you know, I guess the emotional needs, being able to, you know, have some freedom and extricating herself from the responsibility of Kaylee. And then the Pluto is death, you know, and destruction, you know, which has to do, you know, with, you know, Kaylee's life ending. Anyway, the ruler, another thing, ruler of eighth house in her chart, conjunct Mars. This now, you know, shows she could be foolhardy, you know, an intense risk taker. The 8th house rules death, and the 5th house children. Now, with the ruler of the 8th house conjuncting Mars, a volatile, explosive planet, you know, it indicates to me that maybe, you know, Kaylee had died in, you know, in some, you know, in a manner connected with some form of violence. Unfortunately, sadly, but true. And then the ruler of the 5th conjunct the 8th house cusp, you know, reinforces, you know, the thing with the ruler of the 8th, you know, positive in the 5th, is that, you know, that there's really also, in my mind, no great, you know, surprisement or amazement in the fact that Jupiter was the, you know, was the ruling planet in this particular, you know, chart, you know, in the ruler of the 5th and the 8th house, and Jupiter, you know, never tends to be minuscule or small. So obviously, you know, maybe this is part of the reason why this murder became such, you know, became so prolific and was in such a high profile murder. Casey Anthony also has Pluto conjunct her 4th house cusp, which could indicate, you know, many upheavals, transformations, and you know, unexpected changes associated with her home and family life. Now, this is something where, you know, could be, you know, a death, you know, could occur, you know, prominent family members. Something connected with the home is, you know, might occur, you know, as far as, you know, the death is, you know, concerned in this particular instance. And, you know, if she was the murderer or had some involvement in Kaylee's death, you know, obviously, you know, this is pretty, you know, strong position in the chart for that. You know, in this particular instance, this could be, you know, one of the contributing factors as to having, you know, someone in the, you know, home and family, you know, die in the manner in which it happened. Another thing she has in her chart is Uranus, natal Uranus conjuncts natal Mars, which could indicate sporadic, erratic, volatile, you know, unpredictable behavior. Someone that can be very reckless and impetuous and, you know, and impulsive with their actions, and not necessarily always thinking, you know, clearly before they act. And somebody that might have, you know, some resistance to authoritative figures, somebody that would have difficulty adhering to like a regimented schedule in some manner, or you know, conflicts with superiors, you know, because of a possible rebellious streak. Her chart ruler was in the 8th house, so this is something where, you know, occult matters, sex, death can figure prominently, taxes, inheritances. It shows that, you know, maybe in her case, that if she has irreconcilable differences with, you know, one or more of her family members, which, you know, she could very well still have and may continue throughout, you know, majority, or, you know, between the majority or perhaps even all of her life, inheritances may very well be problematic, because there's not going to be much incentive for the, you know, her parents especially, to give her any money when they pass away, you know, due to the fact that, you know, she essentially threw her parents, you know, metaphorically or figuratively speaking, under the bus, so to speak. So, you know, that obviously, you know, can be, you know, I can really see that this is another thing that's not a, you know, where I'm not flabbergasted that her chart ruler was in the 8th house, and the fact that it's her sun sign in that 8th house, you know, for, you know, a strong planet in your chart, that to me, you know, is not a shocker either. Another thing, what I wanted to get on now is some of the things that, you know, are associated with her chart that did, you know, had transpired, you know, in her life from the time when Kaylee, you know, became missing, and the time where we found out later is where she was, you know, presumably she was murdered. On the death of Kaylee Anthony, this is speculative, but based on what I've researched, it probably occurred somewhere near like mid-June of 2008, and transiting Pluto in Kaylee's fifth house of children, conjunct Neptune, which is, can be associated with chemicals and water. It wasn't really, this is another thing that wasn't much of a shocker to me, because at this, particular moment, in time, Pluto can rule death, and Neptune, is chemicals or possibly water. And the two big theories at the trial were, death by the chloroform or the drowning theory, which I really don't. The drowning theory I don't really believe. I mean, I think, consensus feels that was just a ruse from the defense in the trial to try to throw the the thing with the chloroform off of Casey, the scent off her, and put it possibly on somebody else. And another interesting thing was at this time was that Pluto was actually in a transition period where it was going from like 0 degrees Capricorn and moving in retrograde motion into like 2959, 2958, the very end of Sagittarius, and it went from obviously Pluto and conservative, responsible Capricorn into the freedom-loving sign of Sagittarius. And maybe this is one of the things that kind of where Casey was compelled, if she committed this crime. I emphasize if, because it never was proven in a court of law, but if she did, then maybe one of the reasons was to extricate herself from the responsibilities of Kaylee, and and maybe go on to do something where she would have more freedom in her life. Now, I know that those ends just don't justify the means, but if you're somebody that's possibly in her mind, obviously not thinking right, that's what what her mindset may have been at the time as far as that went. Now, another thing I want to get on is at her trial, when the verdict was announced on July 5th, 2011, was that transiting Jupiter was conjuncting the 10th house of status, recognition, and reputation, and also connected with possibly the public eye. And as we know, Jupiter, has been referred to as merciful fatso. It's benevolent and kind, and it sure was pretty kind on Casey at this particular moment in time. Very possibly. And not only was it conjuncting her 10th house cusp, but it was also sextiling her natal moon and natal Jupiter, so that was auspicious and providential maybe for her getting the acquittal in this case. And another thing is that the progressed, I guess the last but not least, something current in her life right now, her progressed Venus is conjunct her 10th house cusp. Speak of the devil, the 10th house cusp again, right? Notoriety now has been for her is connected with a new romantic interest apparently, and she is supposedly pregnant with this with a new child. And I think also the fact that progressed Venus is sextile her 5th house ruler Jupiter, so perhaps this could be something maybe positive as far as the situation, this new child, perhaps, and her union with this new person. Anyway, that's going to be it for this YouTube astrological segment for Casey Anthony and her natal chart. And stay tuned next time, where I'll be dissertating and talking about the ascendant sextile trine Uranus in the natal horoscope. Until next time, people, stay well.